Book 7, The Soldier in the Middle of the World, Chapter 24. It seems that the guide has solved our famine problem. It was late afternoon on the 55th day of harvest, less than a week since the meadow in the forest was created, and the lieutenant was going through the inventory lists in the forward office. He'd spent the last 2 hours inspecting the storehouses to make sure they weren't off by so much as a pinch of grain. They weren't. He felt a mixture of satisfaction and despair, realizing that since the executions almost 2 weeks ago, there were no more problems. The executions had worked. Either the 2 men responsible had been eliminated, or those who had been stealing were too frightened to try again, especially now that there was a guide who might find them out. He was tallying the columns when footsteps hurried up the stairwell. An official messenger from Ida Mia rushed to Major Twig's door and knocked. "Urgent message from General Thorne, sir." The door opened and Major Twig took the message. "Reply needed?" "No, sir, not unless there are complications." Twig's face tensed at that answer. "Then go eat and rest before you return in the morning." Twig turned back to the command office, leaving the door open as the messenger trotted down the stairs. The lieutenant squirmed in his chair, wondering what the message might be about, and if it was anything that he could use. His leg bounced in anticipation as he heard a page turn, but no other sound from the major. The lieutenant waited for a minute, then 5 minutes. Restless with wonder, he stood up and walked to the command office door. Twig was seated behind the desk, supporting his head in his hands, staring at the message. Something about his perpetually stressed demeanor seemed heavier than normal. "Sir, do you need anything?" Twig didn't look up but shook his head. "No, thank you, Lieutenant," he whispered. The lieutenant pursed his lips in disappointment and was starting to walk away when Twig spoke again. "Thorne." "Yes, sir?" Twig brushed a hand across his eyes and nose before continuing. "You can do something. I suppose I shouldn't put this off." He looked up at the lieutenant with unexpectedly distraught eyes. "Gather the other officers and higher-rank sergeants. It seems that the guide has solved our famine problem." The lieutenant smiled hesitantly. "Well, that's good news, sir." Twig only said, "We'll see about that." Then he added, "Thorne, if your other parents were still alive, would they be older than 50? The lieutenant, confused by the question, frowned. "No, sir." "Well, Lieutenant, my father is 53. And just last season, my mother turned 50. She was barely 17 when I was born. They lived down in Marsh. Both survived the pox and deceit." The lieutenant, unsure of what to do with that information, came up with, "Congratulations, sir." Twig looked down at the desk and again held his head in his hands. "Lieutenant, go get the others." Half an hour later, every man seated in the large command office wore a similar look of shock. The lieutenant fought the urge to cry out, "That can't be right. The Creator would never demand that." Instead, he sat on a stool in the corner, horrified, as Major Twig soberly read the message. A voice only the lieutenant could hear provided commentary. "Guide Lannard has received a vision, with help from some newly discovered seeds that can be crushed and inhaled for visionary results. General Thorne and Colonel Waynes were witnesses." You saw how Thorne and Slither manipulated Lannard before. They did it again. "The Creator has demanded a sacrifice before he will save the world." Don't say a word, young pair. You know as well as I do they're using the idea of the Creator for their own purposes. Stay quiet. "He requires as the sacrifice the life of every citizen aged 50 or older, unless they have unusual circumstances, such as providing a needed service, or being solely responsible for caring for a viable child or grandchild. All individuals, no matter what their age, who are crippled, chronically ill, mentally infirm, blind, or deaf will also sacrifice their lives for the good of the world. Interesting that Lemuel Thorne is over 50 and crippled, and I'd suggest that he's also mentally infirm. Supposedly, he believes he provides a needed service to the world, but who needs this kind of service? All children orphaned by the volcano will also be evaluated as to their ability to add to the future world's development. If they are found lacking, they will also be sacrificed so that they can join their parents in death. If Thorne cares nothing for his 9 daughters, surely it's not difficult to dismiss other people's children. Essentially, he wants the ugly children gone. By the way, you're considered an orphan even at the mature age of supposedly 27, and he's the only parent providing for your support, even though you're working as a lieutenant. So he has yet another dubious reason to be allowed to continue. Major Twig finished reading the message, concluding with the news that each fort was responsible for notifying the citizens of the vision and informing them that herbs to assist with their painless passing would be arriving soon. All individuals deemed necessary to die would do so within 7 days. Not a single man in the office said a word. There was nothing they could say. "Gentlemen," Twig said quietly as he held up a second piece of paper, "there is a petition process where those over 50 who believe they should be exempt from sacrificing themselves may send a document to Colonel Waynes, with the testimonies of 3 known relatives verifying the person's importance, as well as a form filled out by the fort confirming the person's worth." Sergeant Major Healy, sitting next to the major, suddenly began to huff. "Great, I'm over 50. No. Healy," Twig interrupted him before he passed out. "You are needed. The general sent an additional note specifying that." He slapped a small piece of paper in front of Healy. He snatched it up, read it, and exhaled. The other men nodded a somber congratulations. "Now," Major Twig continued, "as I was saying, there's a petition process, but people have only 2 days to put together their appeals. According to the guide's vision, the population of the world needs to be reduced by about 1/3. The officers gasped. "There's only enough food to sustain approximately 325,000 people," he continued in a low voice. "According to the recent count, there are about 520,000 people who survived the eruption and the pox. The sacrifices necessary to prevent the survivors from suffering a slow, painful death by starvation. Those who sacrifice themselves now, the guide promised, will be assured of a glorious afterlife with the Creator. The guide also sent a list of statements from the writings," he waved a page disinterestedly, "demonstrating that those who sacrifice in this life will be given greater possessions in the next." His voice began to falter. "We'll post these passages," he said half-heartedly, "as if it'll do any good." Healy looked around the room at the shocked faces before turning to Twig. "The village won't go for it. How does Thorne think this is going to work? Even if death is painless, it's still death." Twig sighed heavily as he held up another paper. "This statement, also to be posted, declares that any opposition to the guide's edicts reveal themselves as aligned with the refuser. The writings speak of a spirit who rebelled against the Creator, and he and his followers were cast out. They roamed the world trying to get others to rebel. Any citizens who find themselves opposing the guide must conclude that they are under the refuser's influence. Those who continue to fight," he paused, "will be executed by the fort." That finally brought shouts of anger. "What?" cried a staff sergeant. "So if some grandfather or old aunt won't voluntarily kill themselves, I have to put together an execution squad? No, I refuse." Several other men chorused their objections until Major Twig glared at them. "Gentlemen," he said sternly, "according to this decree, you're demonstrating that you are under the influence of the refuser, and because of your refusal to follow the guide, You two should be sacrificed." Every man fell silent. And that's how it works. Twig swallowed hard. "Do you realize the situation we have here, men? We must be the examples. We have to deliver this news and see that it's followed. If we're not loyal to the guide and the general, we'll be examples of how swiftly one can lose one's life. Don't make me do that," he pleaded earnestly. "This is hard for everyone, men." His voice began to quaver. "My own parents will die. Not only is my father over 50, but he has a bad leg. I won't even get time to leave the fort to say goodbye." He sat down heavily on the chair and began to massage his forehead. Healy put a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I'm so sorry." The rest of the men sat in silence, tallying who they knew that would fall. There was no hope, nothing they could do. The lieutenant tried to swallow, but his throat wouldn't move. The idea of watching an execution squad run down someone like Mugga, who was always willing to give a fight, would he take a life because General Thorne demanded it? "When do we tell the village?" one man asked quietly, breaking the oppressive silence. "Tonight," Twig whispered. "Who's going to do it?" "I have an idea," said another. "Let Lieutenant Thorne do it. Most of the old people think he's Colonel Shin come back to life anyway. If anyone can soften the blow, it might be him." The lieutenant bit his lip in worry, trying to imagine what he could possibly say when Twig spoke up. "No," he said gruffly. "No. General Thorne was very specific that his son be not involved in any of this. He doesn't want him at the amphitheater, he doesn't want him distributing the herbs, and he doesn't want him digging the mass graves. Lieutenant Thorne, you are to remain in the mansion until the 63rd day." The lieutenant was surprised and relieved, but said, "I don't understand. Not that I want to see this happen, but I have a duty to—" "To obey your father," Twig said savagely. "As do I. We must all remember our allegiance is solely to General Thorne, and whatever he declares is our will. You have questions, ask him yourself." He took a deep breath and turned to the rest of the men. "In the meantime, we need to figure out the best way to present this. We need a good story. I'm open to your suggestions." Half an hour later, the officers and sergeants quietly filed out of the office to tell the soldiers to send the word. There was a mandatory meeting in the amphitheater. Everyone would be expected to attend, no matter their condition, except for Lieutenant Thorne, who wandered numbly back to the mansion. Twig held the drafted speech in his hands as he slowly, unwillingly walked down the stairs. They decided to begin with the report of just how serious the famine was, how many people were expected to die agonizing deaths from starvation if nothing was done, and how the guide, in their greatest hour of need, had received a marvelous and beautiful revelation from the Creator. Guide Lannard had a plan. Shem sat up in bed in the middle of the night, panting. "Dear Creator," he whispered to his bedroom, "he can't do this." "Shemmy, what's wrong?" Kala asked, sitting up next to him. She touched his face and realized he was sweating. "Shem, what's happened?" He caught her hand. "Not what has happened. What will happen. What Lemuel's planning. He's going to kill 1/3 of the world and say it was the Creator's will." How can he do that?" she stammered. "The guide he made. I've been pondering it for days, trying to understand what Thorne would want with a guide. But now it's been revealed to me. He's using him. They don't have enough food, so the guide is calling for—" It was too terrible to share with her. Kala kneeled on the bed in front of him and took his face in her hands. "Tell me, Shemmy," she said gently. "Tell me what's going to happen. That's part of my calling as your wife, to provide comfort to the guide, remember?" Shem kissed her hands. She'd find out eventually anyway. "Kala, They're going to force everyone over 50 to breathe in a lethal concoction of herbs. They need to reduce the population to match the amount of food they have. Everyone crippled or injured is to die as well. Even children, Calla. He's found a way to eliminate the remaining dump children, the ones we couldn't convince to come to Salem. This is why he wouldn't take our offer of food. He'd rather kill than accept help. His shoulders began to shake. Calla wrapped her arms around him. "Oh, Shem," was all she could say. They sat together in silent horror for several minutes before Shem spoke again. "He's murdering hundreds of thousands of people in the Creator's name," he whispered. "Those in the world will never believe the Creator is anything more than a cruel being. How can we teach them now? How can they ever learn to trust him if they believe him to be the sacrifice-demanding monster Lemuel is making him out to be?" Calla kissed his cheek. "Shemmy, maybe we're past that time." "What do you mean?" "Shem, maybe there'll be no more opportunities to send scouts to the world. Maybe this is another big step toward the last day." "My love, have you been talking to Mari?" "She's shared her 'it's around the corner' theory with me," Calla admitted. "But that's not why I'm saying it. The signs are all there, Shem. The land tremors, Mount Deceit awakening, now famine." He sighed. "I know. I can see the signs too. And you're right. I know you are. I just don't feel ready for it." "Salem is fantastically ready, Guide Zenas. You and Rector Shin have done all that is humanly possible to prepare us for the last day. We have reserves, we have plans, we have a place of escape. Everyone is ready." Shem felt in the dark for her face and ran his hand gently through her black silky locks, highlighted with silver strands. "Did I ever tell you about the time I sent Captain Karna on a wild turkey chase around Edge, looking for garters who weren't there?" Calla sought out his features in the dark, trying to understand the abrupt shift in topic. I don't see how this has..." Shem put a finger on her lips. "You see, the second strongest soldier race was exceptionally grueling. Karna planned it all. He purposely made my route harder than Perrin's just to annoy me. So, on a cold, rainy night, I staged a garter sighting. I'd waited for weeks until Perrin would be away inspecting a new fort, so Karna would be responsible for finding the garters who were supposedly running through Edge. He took 30 soldiers and went through the village, up and down, back and forth, following clues that, when he was finished, had him exhausted as if he'd run his own strongest soldier race. In fact, I used the same route he planned for me the first year, but in reverse. By dawn, he limped back into the fort, wet, cold, in pain, and frustrated for not finding any garters. I patted him on the back like a concerned brother and told him that there were no reports of anyone injured or anything missing, so he did a good job after all. He smiled gratefully and thanked me for my encouragement. He never realized that I staged it all just to get revenge." "Shemmy," Calla said delicately, "exactly what does this have to do with..." Shem's sigh was despondent. "Oh, don't you see, Calla? What kind of a man would deliberately send another man out on a cold night just for payback? What kind of a man am I?" Calla hid her smirk, easy enough to do in the dark. "Shem, how do you feel about it now?" "Terrible. Back then I laughed about it well into the next planting season, but now, what a horrible thing to do just because I was angry at losing." "Shem, how old were you then?" He sighed again. Almost 23. "How old are you now?" 63. "Haven't you improved over the past 40 years?" Shem didn't answer. Calla kissed him softly. "I know the answer. Yes, you have. If you didn't feel any regret right now, I'd be worried. But Shem, you're a man of incredible conscience. I'm sure Karna on the other side knows what you did to him, and I'm sure he's forgiven you, and probably even chuckled about it. But I know what you're really trying to say. You don't think you're worthy to lead our people to the last day." Shem nodded, still unable to speak. "Shem, the Creator doesn't make mistakes. He knows exactly who he calls. He knows your abilities better than you do. He also knows your weaknesses and what you've done in the past, and still he says you're the right man to lead this people. I have complete faith in you. Now have a little faith in yourself. And if you can't do that, then have faith in the Creator that he knows what he's doing by having you as the guide." Shem kissed his wife. "Thank you," he whispered. "He certainly knew what he was doing when he led me to you. How could I ever do anything without you?" Kala smiled. "There's no place I'd rather be than by your side, especially on the last day. You may be dreading it, but I have to be honest. I'm in Mari's camp. I can hardly wait." "Well," Shem said in resignation, "I have to be in charge only until the deliverer comes. Then I can turn it all over to him and sit back and watch the destruction." "The deliverer, Shemmy," Kala said, almost sounding amused in spite of all the horrible news he'd given her. That confused Shem. "Yes, you know, whoever the Creator will send at the very end to save our people before the destroyer or destruction or whatever occurs to wipe out our enemies. The deliverer," he repeated slowly, astonished his wife had no idea what he was talking about, although he was sure she did. "Oh, how I love you," she said. "You're so sweet, even after all those years in the world. And sometimes you're so naive." "Me? Naive? Kala, what are you talking about?" She snuggled into him. "Waiting for the deliverer." It was the banging on the front door of the mansion that woke the lieutenant early the next morning. He cringed before he forced himself to crawl out of bed. Today was going to continue yesterday's horribleness. Yesterday afternoon, as he trudged home to the mansion before the announcement was made in the amphitheater, he could feel a change in the air, turning it colder and heavier, just as it had when the new guide was brought to the command tower. At the time of the announcement, he stepped outside and sat on the front steps, looking toward the center of edge as if he could see the amphitheater. The 4 soldiers posted to the front walkway of the mansion watched anxiously as well. It wasn't long before they heard the faint wails of mourning, then screams, cries, and sobbing as people made their ways back home. Every soldier stood on guard in the village to make sure no one acted violently, or, if they were over 50, dispatched them since they were doomed to die anyway. The mansion was set in a large field, but even at that distance the lieutenant could feel the waves of terror flowing over to him, as people realized that while they may have survived the eruption of Mount Deceit 13 weeks ago, and then the pox that followed it, they couldn't survive the decrees of the Creator. Feeling nauseated, the lieutenant held his head as he listened to the distant cries and soldiers' shouts until the door opened behind him. "Get in here, Lek," Professor Slither said in an unexpectedly tender tone. "You shouldn't be out here. It's not safe." The lieutenant didn't move. "Son," Slither said, adopting the general's annoying habit of assuming the lieutenant was somehow his. "This is the kind of news that turns decent people into murderers. What do they have to lose? They're dead in less than a week anyway, so they might as well go out having made an impression. And although you aren't responsible, you're the closest target they have to vent their frustration toward the general." The lieutenant still didn't move. "Please, Lek," the old professor implored. "If not for your sake, then for mine, get inside." The lieutenant, surprised at the professor's nervousness, reluctantly stood up. He was taken aback by the worry creasing Slither's plump face. "Thank you," he whispered as the lieutenant went inside. And get your sword back on. Preserving you is the most important thing we can do right now. Preserving me would also be a good idea." The lieutenant sat in a chair by the gathering room windows most of the night, watching. Extra soldiers were posted, and on several occasions angry citizens came running to the mansion, stopping only when they saw the guards didn't care who died or when. No one lost their lives at the mansion, but wailing and shouts signaled that others in Edge did. Many first-year soldiers got to initiate their swords that night. He wondered if there'd be anyone left to take the herbs later in the week, and when he went to bed, he could hardly sleep. So when the pounding on the front door came, he wasn't surprised. He trotted down the stairs, still in his uniform which he hadn't changed out of, to see a small elderly man standing at the door, holding his hat in his hands. "I promise," the director said in a calm voice to the two soldiers blocking the door, their swords unsheathed. "I mean no harm or mischief. I just have a message for the lieutenant about his safety. Please, your guards around the house believe me. Why can't you?" "I'll speak to him," the lieutenant said. "Let him in." The director shook his head. "No, thank you. I'll speak to you here on your doorstep. It'll take only a minute." "All right," the lieutenant said, slightly nervous as to what this was all about. "What do you want to tell me?" The old man took a bracing breath, but his voice was strong as he said, "I told you once, Shin, that if you wanted to discuss the forces of nature, I was your man. Last night I changed my mind. I don't want anything more to do with this world. My wife died 5 years ago. My son and his family were in rivers." He paused to collect himself, because no survivors had been found there. "So there's nothing left for me. There's only one man I'd want to debate with right now, and I suppose I'll have my opportunity to do so at the end of this week." He cleared his throat and looked the lieutenant in the eyes. "The way I see it, you have two legacies, young Perrin Shin." The lieutenant swallowed hard at the name he hadn't heard in a very long time. "And it's vital to your survival that you decide which to follow. Don't believe for one moment that old people like me will fade away without a fight. There are many who have no faith in this guide," he said derisively. "The rest of the world may believe in him, but there are too many of us in Edge who know all about the senselessness of Lannard. His teacher almost reached him on a few occasions, but the pulls of everyone else were just too strong. If the colonel were still alive today and in my position, he'd be strapping on his sword and marching over here to further reduce the number of mouths needing food. I'm here to warn you. I know of a dozen men who served under him who are planning to do just that." But then the man's face softened. "No, he wouldn't," he sighed in defeat. "No, Colonel Shin would be sending a group of men out to Terrap's ruins in search of edible seeds and plants. As if anyone remembers Terrap," he added in an annoyed murmur. "The blast of the volcano did not reach that far west, I'm sure of it. If ever there was a poisoned land, it's this one. That's probably why every other civilization that lived in this world established their villages to the west, not here," he said in exasperation. He took another deep breath to calm himself. The lieutenant watched him, fascinated and thoughtful. "The colonel would try using a trick the beggars do, scavenging sawdust to use as flour and bread. He'd had every citizen who lived along the sea search for surviving fish, and he'd tasked some creative cooks to find ways to bake up or preserve everything they could harvest, including that kelp that washes ashore." "Sir," the lieutenant exclaimed with the first optimism he'd felt in days, "those are excellent ideas. Have you sent a message to the general about them?" The director scoffed. "Ugh, several. He doesn't care. He has his own plans," he said heavily, "and won't listen to any others. But the colonel would have, Lieutenant. He would have taken everyone's ideas and would have worked a way through this crisis. He'd find a way to feed all of us, and he'd go to any lengths to do so. He'd give up his life to preserve us, instead of taking ours to preserve him." The small man straightened up. In less than a week, the world will be a very different place. You could still be a force for good in it, but only if you decide which legacy you'll follow. Personally, I'd rather be a dead reminder of Perrin Shin than a living remnant of Lemuel Thorne. Now, he said, glancing to the soldiers who still stood on either side of the doorway, fidgeting in fury. In the past, talk like that would get me executed, but I'll be dead in a few days anyway, so what does it matter? He put on his hat, nodded to the lieutenant, and said, "When I see my old friend the colonel again, I'll be sure to tell him about you. Maybe there's some truth to the stories of the dead officers, and maybe he can still reach you. Goodbye, Lieutenant Thorne, and good luck in the new world." Dumbfounded, the lieutenant wondered how much the director knew as he plodded down the stairs. The soldiers looked at him in expectation. "Sir," one of them finally said, "should we bring him back?" "Why?" "Didn't you hear what he said about the guide in general?" "He's right," the lieutenant said, almost wanting to smile. When he saw the shock on the guards' faces, he quickly amended. "I mean, he'll be dead in a week anyway. Let him die believing he said his piece." The second guard sighed. "Ugh, I always hated Hegguk. I'd love to rid the world of him right now. Major Krupp does a great impersonation of him. Usually gets on his knees so he's smaller." The lieutenant heard nothing more as he watched the small man make his way between two more leering guards on his way out of the mansion grounds. The lieutenant couldn't help but feel he was watching the last of what was connected to his grandparents and Edge walk away. But Terrap's land, untouched. Maybe Hegguk didn't think anyone remembered it, but the lieutenant had been there twice. Of course the ash hadn't hit there. There was likely plenty of vegetation remaining and even animals. Bison were delicious, but no one in the world knew that. Yet. It wasn't time, the lieutenant knew that. Snow would be falling soon, and that would make exploration impossible. But by planting season? Oh, the world will be desperate for Terrap's land. Mr. Hegguk was right. There was a new world coming, a new regime, one that the lieutenant fully intended to have as his legacy. Even Director Hegguk would be proud. Priscilla wrung her hands anxiously, waiting behind her shack of a house. Finally, she saw someone come down the alley. "Anoki!" she whispered loudly and rushed over to him. She caught him in a hug and tried to kiss him, but he pushed her away. "No time for that. What's so urgent?" "I want to go home," she whimpered. Anoki looked around. "You are home." "No, I want to go back to my mother and sisters in Salem." "Shh!" He clamped his hand over her mouth. "Why?" Priscilla began to cry. Because I'm so lonely. These girls are..." She shrugged, since she couldn't think of the words. "And I hardly ever see you, and I went to my father before he left," she admitted in a whisper. "You what?" Anoki barely kept his voice down. Priscilla winced. "I went to see my father," she repeated, "but he didn't even want to talk to me. He thought I was there to take something." The tears came faster. "He didn't even care. He didn't..." Anoki gripped her by the shoulders. "You didn't tell him about Salem, did you?" Priscilla shook her head. "I couldn't. I was just so surprised. He was so mean to me. He just..." Sobs took over her words. Anoki rolled his eyes. "Well, of course. What'd you expect? Did you never listen to the stories about him? Ever wonder why he didn't send you birthday gifts?" "I don't know," she whined. "I hate it here. Take me home." "You're kidding, right? I'm not going back there. I've got too much to do here." But, Priscilla stammered. Anoki exhaled at her childishness. "Look, you want to go back, then go back. You know the way. Just go through the forest, climb over the boulders, then head up the canyon. Get to that hidden fort. I'm sure it's manned again ever since we left." Priscilla shivered in fear. But that's scary all alone, and I'm not that good on horses. Horses? Anoki interrupted. There are no horses, Priscilla. The two we left up there probably died the day after we abandoned them. You have to do it on foot. Oh, please don't give me that look. You're healthy enough. Take a pack of food and a flask of water. You can make it in a few days. Priscilla stared at him. You'd let me go? Alone? Why not? Because you should protect me. Why? You wanted to follow me, remember? But you should take care of me. You know, you're starting to sound as selfish as your sister. Priscilla pouted. Well, maybe she was right. Then go find her, Anoki said, pushing her away. I've had it with thorn women. No wonder the general wants nothing to do with any of you. He marched away without another word. Priscilla crumpled into the weeds in despair. And that's the end of that chapter. Thank you.